Alrighty, so good afternoon. My name is Cassie Shropshire. I am a business relations consultant with Alabama Department of Rehabilitation Services. We are super excited that you guys have joined this webinar and that you're going to be learning from us today. And so greetings from Alabama. Again, I'm super excited that we have so many others coming from other states. So thank you very much. You can go to the next slide, Ashley. You can go to the next one. All right, so you all should have a copy of the presenters today, a bio of the speakers today in your email. If you don't have that bio, please shoot me a private message and I will get that emailed over to you. Just a few housekeeping. If you need the captions, there is a link in the chat. Please click on that to be able to have access to the captions. Also, our interpreter for today is Miss Lauren Cash. She will be spotlighted the entire time. So please make sure that you rely on her if you are needing ASL. Our presenters for the day, I won't get into their bios because you should have a copy of them. Daniel Spencer is a business relations consultant with the Alabama Department of Rehab Services. Daniel Green is a rehabilitation engineer with the Alabama Department of Rehab Services, and Ashley McElroy is with the Alabama Department of Rehab Services as well, and she is currently the Alabama ACT Director and the ATAP Coordinator. And so even though all of these presenters are from the Alabama Department of Rehab, they all have their own expertise and you're going to hear from them today. And so again, we just say thank you and welcome. Please utilize the chat, but we do have Q&A at the end. So if there's a specific question that you want to ask for one of the presenters, please put that in the Q&A box and I'll be reading some of those questions at the end. If we run out of time with answering the questions, that's definitely okay because we're going to do a question and answer sheet that we'll send in an email along with some other resources of the information that's shared today. So without further ado, I'm going to stop talking and get into this presentation because there's so much information that we want to share. But I just want to remind you that this is an introductory webinar. So if there's more information, more training that you would like to have, you'll be able to reach out to us and we can provide more information. All right. And the last thing before I jump off here, if your name is showing up as Cassie Shropshire, please change that so we can know exactly who you are and where you're coming from. All right, thanks.
Hello, everyone. Can everybody hear me? A thumbs up? Okay, good. Good job. My name is Daniel Spencer. I'm a business relations consultant. I'm African-American male with a beard. I have gray in my beard because I choose to have gray in my beard. I am bald because I choose to be bald. So with that being said, I also want to say that I have been battling these allergies and sinuses that my two young twin sons, 2-year-old sons, have given me this past weekend when I had them. So please bear with me as we go through my part of the presentation. Also, I want to say that Ashley McElroy, we're going to change your name to Daniel McElroy so we can make all the presenters' names Daniel. I think that will sound real good. So with that being said, let's go ahead and go to the first slide. We're noticing that in our society and our workforce that there are a lot of individuals, a lot of employees that are leaving, and sometimes employees just do not understand or know how much it costs to actually replace them. And so I wanted to share with you some statistics, but before I get into that, real quick on the chat, and I won't be able to see that, but I want everyone else to see. If you will type in, what do you feel are the top reasons? Name one reason why individuals are leaving. Why are employees leaving companies? And I'll give you some. We have a lot of individuals that lower pay. Some individuals may leave companies because of burnout, or because they may be angry with the manager. Someone said culture, the culture issues of the company, but a lot of times employees don't understand that when they leave or when they ghost an employee, that it costs money. And so as you see on the slide, the cost to replace an employee, it costs an average of 1/3 the annual salary to replace an employee. SHRM research actually says that it costs as much as almost somewhere between 50 and 60% of that person's annual salary to replace them. And this is not even to mention the overall cost, the losses that the company is experiencing. And so some of these costs to replace an employee involves a loss of productivity, loss, the onboarding costs, recruitment and advertising costs. Those are things that are associated, and they go in with that. And so someone who makes $1,000 a year, it costs $16,000 to replace that person. And just really take time to think about that. And so what we want to do today is share with you a program that the Alabama Department of Rehab Services, or vocational rehabilitation services, have for employees and also for employers. And that the name of that program is RAVE. Our RAVE program was started as a result of a business need. Businesses came to Voc Rehab, and you may hear me say VR, Voc Rehab, State VR, you know, our acronyms, that's what we use, all of them, or Alabama VR, they're all the same. But they came to us because they knew that we work with individuals with disabilities, helping them find jobs. But they had a problem with those individuals who were already in their workforce who had disabilities and having a way to retain those individuals. And so with that being said, they came to us to see if we could create a program that would help them. So we started our RAVE program. So what is RAVE? RAVE stands for Retaining the Valued Employee. Vocational Rehabilitation Services, those employers, what we did was we provided a service, and what it did was to help employers in the way of better managing the disability in the workplace. We help with them as far as lowering their disability related costs and being able to retain that employee whose work performance was being affected by an illness, by injury, or a disability. So our rave service, I'm sorry, has a dual focus, and that dual focus is with the employer as well as with the employee. So let's look at some of the services that the rave program provide for employers. Some of those services include employer intervention and education, teaching them about the ADA, teaching them about how we can come in, and it doesn't have to be what the employee has to in their job, but there are opportunities that could exist in the form of accommodations and modifications to their job, to their task, where we'll be able to where that person can still be an efficient and productive employee. We also help employers with looking at the task analysis of what that individual is having to do, what their responsibilities and duties are. The technical assistance part, the resource linkages. So linking them to those resources that are in place, whether they're online, such as the Ask Jan or the Earn website, as well as the community resources or agencies that can assist with helping to provide accommodations. Also, the accommodation. We see that a lot of businesses, a lot of employers they may struggle with knowing what to do. What examples, what ideas can we use to help this person to retain and stay on the job? So we provide, our RAVE program provides assistance with that. Also guidance on the work opportunity tax credit. Now, I'm not trying to put any lawyers out of business, but I'll speak just on my personal experience in the area that I serve. I found that there were lawyers in our area that were charging a lot of money to teach businesses how to complete the work opportunity tax credit forms. And so we provide that training, our business relations team, and we'll talk, I'll share with you who they are a little bit later, but our business relations team have the experience, the knowledge and experience to be able to walk the employer through those steps of the completing and filling out the forms for the work opportunity tax credit. And last but not least, I believe is very important and critical, is the ongoing follow-up. So not only do we help with providing the accommodation and setting it up, we don't just say, hey, they're accommodated, we're finished. No, but what we do is we continue to follow up to ensure that that accommodation is successful, not just for the employee, but also for the employer. And so the second focus, so that dual focus, the first focus is of the employer. The second focus we want to focus on is to assist that job seeker, that worker with the disability, to help them through Voc Rehab's job retention services. And some of those employees that will be what will fall under that will be those employees whose work performance are being negatively impacted because of the physical and mental impairments that they have. The employees whose their job may be in jeopardy because they're struggling. They're not being as efficient as they once was. They may not be able to remember tasks, and they're really struggling in their performance on the job. And so our RAVE services provide employees who fall into that category. Also, we have those employees who fall into the category where they're ready to return to work, but they're currently on a disability related leave. And either them and or the business are trying to figure out how can they bring them back into the workplace with the help of an accommodation. And then you have those employees who have the ability and they want to be promoted and they're qualified to be promoted. But what happens is that their disability affects that promotion. They may not be able to perform those tasks, but they could perform those tasks with a reasonable accommodation. And so those employees who fall into that category, we also serve through our RAVE services. So some of the other services which may include but are not limited to, and let me say this, let me remind, especially those who are businesses on the webinar, that we work with individuals with the wide range of disabilities. And just because an individual may have one specific type of disability, I want to remind and encourage you not to lump and include everybody who has that disability in the same category, because every person with a disability have their own symptoms. They have varying levels and degrees to that disability. And it's important that we treat them on a that we treat everybody on a the situation, a case by case basis, and not put everybody together and say, okay, everybody with vision impairments, they have the same symptoms and they're going to have the same problems. Well, that's not the case. It's a case by case basis. It's based on that person. So some of the services to the employee that include but are not limited to will be the assessing where that employee is at, counseling and guidance, assistive technology, accommodation, evaluations, retraining, job coach, bringing someone in to help the person with the job. And then that job coach fades out as that person becomes more familiar and they're able to do their job. We talked about the resource linkages, assistance with reassignment. So that person may not be able to come back and do their job, but they can be reassigned to another position that they have the knowledge, skills, and experience to be able to do. And last but not least is our outplacement assistance services. Those services involve being able to, sometimes accommodations may not help. And so with that being said, what we do is our RAVE services allow us to be able to work with that employee to help find them at another employment, another job. Next slide, please. So now we've addressed the dual focus approach of what the RAVE services provide to the employer as well as to the employee. So now let's talk about what those steps are to our RAVE process. The first step is contact. So you will contact someone from Vocational Rehabilitation Services to ask for requesting for assistance with workplace accommodations. The second step is to meet. What we'll do is we'll schedule a meeting with a team from VR. We'll schedule a meeting with the company rep or reps, as well as with the employee. We'll schedule a meeting to meet. Our third step is an evaluation, where we come and we look and we observe, and we'll hear more from Daniel Green, our rehabilitation engineer, will talk to us more about that step, where they come in and evaluate and look at the tasks that employee is performing and have to perform what they're asked to do. And we look to see how we can provide an accommodation or suggest an accommodation as it relates to those tasks that they may be struggling in the workplace. Our fourth step is the feedback. So our rehabilitation engineer will provide written feedback, recommendations as it pertains to what type of accommodations may assist that person. Now, let me say this, all accommodation doesn't necessarily have to be physical. Some can be dealing with medical, it can be dealing with that person's medicine that they may be taking. So let's not, again, we don't want to lump everyone into that same category as it has to be something physical. We have to do something physical to their workplace. And last but not least, the solutions, where we employ those solutions, whether they're built, whether they're delivered, they're ordered, they're set up. We put those accommodations in place. And so the ADA law says that the employer actually chooses the accommodation. So I wanted to share with you who our team is statewide. As you can see, we have a map, and I believe you all have a copy of the slides where you can see across the state our business relations team. There are about 16 of us. And so if you need to, you see someone in your part of the state, please do not hesitate to reach out to them as if you have a case like this where an employer and an employee can benefit from our RAVE services. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce our next presenter, Daniel Gray, Rehabilitation Engineer.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am the Rehabilitation Engineer with Assistive with the Alabama Department of Rehabilitation Services, and I covered North Alabama. I'm going to get into my role in this process and how we work together in the RAVE process. So my role is to work with the business relations consultant to determine the need of the employee. We communicate with the employer, we discuss with the employee, and the rehabilitation engineer goes out to the employee's work site. That could be a variety of things. That could be blue collar work, that could be white collar work, that could be working in an office or a cubicle all day, or that could be hands-on. It just depends on what that employee's duties are. It also depends on what their abilities are. We work with a wide range of individuals with a wide range of abilities and different jobs, different job duties. From there, the rehabilitation engineer makes recommendations that accommodate that employee, depending on their abilities, depending on their job duties, and the task you're trying to accomplish. And then once those recommendations are made, the rehabilitation engineer will often meet with the employer or the employee and all that are involved in that process and set up that assistive technology, deliver it, and make sure that it is actually meeting those needs. So in that evaluation process specifically, it's a collaborative effort. We meet with the rehabilitation engineer meets with the employee. Oftentimes we'll include the business relations consultant, the employer, whoever else needs to be involved in that process to best help that employee. And it starts with understanding what we're trying to accomplish. What is that employee's, what are their job duties, what are their responsibilities, and what is their difficulty with performing them? So basically, what's the issue? Then from there, the rehabilitation engineer will determine what accommodations will best assist that employee. And again, it's based off of their abilities and what they're trying to accomplish based off of their job duties. That is very broad, it's very vague. I'll get into some specific examples later, but across the spectrum of employees, abilities, and job duties, that can look like a lot of things. The most important thing about that is that even throughout the whole process, but even the evaluation process, it's not just a rehabilitation engineer going out there evaluating and then recommending something. It's a group effort with employer, employee, business relations consultant, all of us working to best serve this employee's needs. I'm going to tell you what accommodations look like and what they aim to address. So it's not limited to just these categories, but the main accommodations you'll see address physical limitations. So if an employee is physically limited in performing a job duty or is unable to accomplish a task that can be accommodated for, and it constitutes a physical limitation. Computer access is another big area. I mean, I use a computer to do my job. You're all on a computer or a phone or some device with internet connectivity. We need computers to do our everyday jobs. And if you can't access that or you can't manipulate a computer easily, then that is part of your job that can be accommodated for. And then the last two areas are communication and policy. So if something needs to be communicated to an employee, or an employee needs a different method to communicate, that can be considered an accommodation, as well as a change in policy, such as adapting those job duties or adapting how their job is done in order to accommodate the employee to fulfill those job duties. There are a variety of accommodations. Like I said, a lot of jobs, a lot of different duties, and everyone's different. So it can range from something as a simple low-tech solution that I'll get into what that looks like and what a low-tech solution is, to a complex, more high-tech solution. There's just a lot of assistive technology out there, and it's aimed at addressing specific issues, and it falls everywhere in between simple to complex. And then the last thing is that I'm a rehabilitation engineer, and engineers are problem solvers. So the reason that you send a rehabilitation engineer out to do this evaluation is because we are also able to come up with a custom solution. We can design or adapt equipment to an employee or an individual's need. And that's kind of why we're here, is to think on our feet. So as far as accommodation goes, most common issues that you'll see before you even start to address computer access or implementing different pieces of assistive technology, most things can be solved through a different equipment layout or posture and positioning at your workstation. So that's just a little diagram that shows the ideal setup if you're in a seated position or if you're in a standing position. And you would be surprised how many issues or common problems can just be addressed by rearranging the items on your workstation, rearranging how you're sitting. Because when you think about it, you're doing this for up to 8 hours a day, 8 to 10 hours, depending on your shifts, depending on how long your workday is. You want to make sure that you're setting up your body and setting up your workstation in a position that's going to minimize that stress, minimize that strain, and reduce the risk of injury and fatigue throughout the day. Glare and lighting are often overlooked too. You'd be surprised how much that factors into fatigue and strain, especially relating to the eyes, the amount of blue light you're getting, the amount of glare, and how quickly you're fatiguing. And then routine is just break up that monotony. With if you're sitting there for 8 hours a day, be sure to schedule in breaks so you're not just in that same position. You're putting a lot of stress on your body in one position throughout the day, and allowing yourself a routine to minimize that would solve a lot of issues. So we're also going to talk about low tech. Low tech is in regards to the technology because usually it's less expensive. It usually requires less training. It's simpler, or it could be low tech because of the function of the technology. It's not complex in how it works. It's not complex in what it's trying to accomplish. It's considered low tech. So this includes lots of things. It's usually, it kind of borders on custom solutions sometimes, because it can be as simple as large print text or high contrast font. It can be organization methods for keeping things together, keeping not just documents or whatever the employee or individual is working with organized, but organizing different tasks so that it's easier for that employee to complete. It can involve tactile aids like bump dots or different markers to assist an employee if specifically they're visually impaired. If they have a tactile aid that assists them with performing that job duty, that's low tech. It's not something that's expensive or complex or difficult to acquire, and it can be added relatively easily. And then there's not a whole lot of training. You just have to understand what different tactile aid means what. Handheld magnifiers, also low tech. And then we have a couple examples of a picture checklist, which is what this employee is using, which just assists them with visual aid for their job duties. So this was an employee that had worked at this company for a while. They had been performing these job duties for a while, and they acquired a disability that made their memory difficult and they were not able to recall the different steps, the procedure for their job. So a simple picture checklist was a good way to keep them on task and to remind them that this is what you're supposed to do at this time, and here's how you perform that process. So again, simple, low tech, it's not complex. It's something that can easily be implemented and doesn't perform a complex solution. And then this is an example of a guide. So this was a procedure change with the fax machine that this employee had worked before, but they had difficulty in recalling the steps to perform the functions on the fax machine due to their disability. So a simple guide was created to walk them through the steps, and you can see they're referencing the guide, and then it shows step by step. Here's the button you press to perform this task. Here's the next button you press. Here's where you just lays it out. Very low tech solution, not expensive to implement, and then the employee can reference that pretty easily. And it's a quick, low tech solution. So on the other end of the scale is high tech. High tech is in regards to the technology itself, because it's usually more complex in its operation. It's usually more expensive, or it's high tech because of the amount of training or the learning curve that's required to use it. Oftentimes, this is purpose-built assistive technology aimed at addressing a specific solution. So if you see in this image over here, that is a chair that is able to electronically raise and lower itself with a button. So like a normal office chair that usually operates through hydraulics, you're not having to stand up, adjust the chair. It automatically and electronically will raise and lower itself for you. This is considered high tech because it's more complex in its operation. Now, the learning curve for it is not as steep, but it is also expensive. So this is considered high tech, and it's aimed at addressing a specific solution. If someone has a limitation that doesn't allow them to adjust the height of a chair and they need something to do it automatically, this is a high tech solution. Other examples of that usually include speech to text, like Dragon Naturally Speaking, or other dictation software. It can include eye gaze, adaptive mice, such as a trackball mice, a joystick mouse, head control, or switches or closed circuit television, magnifiers, things like that. Things that are more complex in their operation, usually more expensive, or might require more training to operate the equipment. So over here, this is just an example of an individual using eye gaze to type with an on-screen keyboard. So all of this constitutes high tech, and it's just another example, it's just another broad category of accommodations you can see. So in the middle of all that is why a rehabilitation engineer is performing this evaluation, which is because we can offer custom solutions. With an engineering background, we're able to design, to create, and to adapt existing assistive technology for an individual. So we have 3 examples here. We will actually get to the one on the left in just a second, and we'll take you through the rave process with that specific example. That image in the middle is of an employee who one of his job requirements was to dust some very tall ceilings. They're about 20 feet. And if you can see in that image, it might be kind of small, but on the end of that is a duster. And that was the duster that was an essential piece of equipment for his job duty that he needed to use to dust the ceilings. However, he had limited control of his left hand. So dusting with those ceilings were difficult to operate the duster, to maneuver it and to keep it steady and to get it exactly where he wanted it to go. So the custom solution, because if you can see, this thing doesn't exist. It's not an off-the-shelf piece of commercially available assistive technology. This was something that was created specifically for this employee to perform his job duties. It's just a CP cane. It's the cane with the forearm cuff, the brace, and the handle. And it was modified to allow the duster to adapt into the CP brace. So with that, it gave him a little bit more control over it. He was able to use it with one arm. He was able to reach the ceilings and perform that job duty. So that's not a super complex custom solution. It's just something that didn't exist that a rehabilitation engineer was able to implement, recognize the need, and then come up with a custom solution to address the problem. On the right, that is an individual using a modified string trimmer. So this individual had limited motor function of his right arm. And if you've ever used a string trimmer, I believe that the controls were located up near the up on the shaft of the string trimmer, where it was difficult for him to operate it. And not only was it difficult to operate, it was also difficult for him to maneuver it, because at the same time he was having to operate the string trimmer and then move it to trim the grass. So a rehabilitation engineer modified that harness so it could support the weight a little bit easier. So he wasn't just having to lift the string trimmer with using his arms and using one arm that had limited control. And then it was modified with that crossbar there so that he could use his right arm. If he couldn't necessarily control the string trimmer itself and support the weight of it, he could, from that contracted position, hold the string trimmer, manipulate it more easily, and then operate the controls with his left hand. So again, these are not overly complex solutions to modify the equipment, but they are custom because they do not exist commercially and off the shelf, and required modification to an essential piece of equipment for that employee. So that other example that was on that slide is the case that we're going to walk through that shows you the RAVE process from start to finish to assist an employee.
So we felt that it was important not to just talk about and show you all the RAVE process as far as on the slides, but also to provide a real example of how that the RAVE process is implemented. And so with that being said, the 5-step process in this situation, with this example, we had a consumer who works at the North Jackson Pharmacy. And so they had contacted. What they did was, again, the first step is contact. They reached out to, the employer had reached out to our community rehab partner who was providing services for with our consumer. And what they did was they reached out to our counselor and business relations consultant. And so what we did was, after that, we ended up scheduling a meeting. We met with the shift supervisor, as well as we met with our business relations consultant and our engineer to discuss what are those workplace barriers to identify, because sometimes employees are not able to explain in a way that is clear to the employer, and the employer is having a hard time understanding. I don't understand on where the struggle is at. And so by having that meeting, by bringing all of the parties together, we all were able to discuss what those workplace barriers were.
So from there, the engineer went into the pharmacy and evaluated the need for the employee. So oftentimes, even if it's not, there can be difficulties with explaining adequately what the disability is, or what the need is, or what the issue with performing that job duty is. But sometimes the solution isn't inherently obvious. They want to perform a certain task, but the employer is not sure how to best accommodate that employee. So the rehabilitation engineer met with the employer, met with the employee, the individual at their workplace, and they evaluated the problem. So the issue was the individual was not able to reach the register. They wanted to provide that individual with more access to the register so that they could have more shift time, more opportunity to work, and increased job duties as well. So the individual in question was short in stature, unable to reach the register, and needed to move back and forth from the register. And if you can see in that right image, left of the register. So if it was just a simple stool, she would have been stuck behind the register, behind the computer, wouldn't have been able to maneuver to the left to take care of any other job duties, interact with customers, things of that nature. So upon evaluation, the rehabilitation engineer came up with a solution, which you can see in that moving image. It is a stool that slides out like a drawer and then drops some legs down to support the weight of the individual standing upon it. So this is something that moves out of the way when it's something that on the next image, you can see how it originally operated as a drawer. Part of the evaluation process is after that, the rehabilitation engineer recognizes the need at the evaluation, and they submit the recommendations to the BRC, to the counselor, and the employer as well receives those recommendations so that they can see this is the issue, this is what is being addressed, and this is the accommodation that we think will best solve that problem, best address that issue. From there, the assistive technology or the accommodation, in this case, it's this stowable stool, is implemented. Now, sometimes the solution works right off the bat. There's no issues. You follow up with the employee, with the employer, with the BRC, and you determine that the accommodations met the employee's needs. In this case, the individual felt like there was not enough room to move around. She was kind of stuck on that stool with limited space. So with that follow-up, the stool was then modified. You can see there's a hinge on it with additional legs. And on the next image, you'll see that that folds out to accommodate more space for that employee so that she's not up against the counter, up against the register. She's not going to feel like she's going to fall off whenever she steps up there. So there's a little bit more space. So part of that process is feedback as well. Once the need is recognized, the accommodation is recommended, and then that assistive technology is implemented. There is a follow-up process to determine the success of those accommodations and to make sure there's no further need or further issue that needs to be addressed with the RAVE team, with the employer, the rehabilitation engineer, and the business relations consultant, and making sure that those employees' needs are met. So in conclusion, with the rehabilitation engineering and assistive technology, it's important to start simple. If you start throwing a bunch of expensive, complex assistive technology at a very simple problem, you're going to waste a lot of time and money for something that probably could be solved with a very simple, maybe even a low-tech solution. It's also important to remember that assistive technology is not a one-size-fits-all game. Just because an accommodation works for one individual, or because there is a solution that works for a specific disability, it's important, again, not to lump all individuals with the same disability, same job duties, similar individuals together, because it's not one size fits all. Just because it works for one doesn't mean it's necessarily going to work for everyone. And then it's important to keep in mind what the goal of that accommodation is. If you are getting bogged down in the weeds with a specific solution and you're trying very hard to implement it, but it's not actually going to address the need, you've lost the goal of what the RAVE process is. And that is a collaborative effort to assist an employee. No matter what that looks like, the end goal, the objective of all of this is to assist that employee with performing that job duty, or minimizing discomfort, or just allowing them to work in that workplace to the best of their abilities. With that, I'm going to introduce Ashley McElroy. She's going to talk with you about APT program.
Hey y'all, I'm Ashley, aka Daniel McElroy. I'm so glad to be able to join these guys to talk to you about accommodations in the workplace. And so you've heard some great resources. We have the business relations team and we have the rehab engineering team, and they're all available to help you. And they know about our resources as well through Accessing Potential through Assistive Technology. That's our APT program. But I want you to also be an expert on this, because you may not always have a Daniel. So I want you to know that there's things that you can do if you don't have direct access to these individuals. Now, I want you to always try to reach out to ADRS as much as possible, but sometimes that may not be the most efficient route, or it may not be an option. So we have a program through ADRS that is funded through the Assistive Technology Act, and we call that program Accessing Potential through Assistive Technology, and we provide services for Alabama citizens. And that these services are available to anyone in Alabama. So the individual does not have to be a consumer of ADRS to participate in these services. We do have a lending library that we started last year where you can borrow assistive technology. We can do product demonstrations. We do have durable medical equipment reuse centers. And we also provide assistive technology training and technical assistance to organizations. And then we can provide information on assistive technology and services that are available throughout the state. So let me tell you a little more about each of these services. So our lending library is based out of Birmingham. However, we do our best to serve across the state wherever the individual is. We have devices available for short-term loan. That's usually about 30 days. And those loans are for the purpose of a few things. One of the major purposes is to help individuals try technology before they go out and buy it. We want to make sure we're saving consumers money because we don't want you spending money on devices that just do not work. So our goal over the next couple of years is to continue building our library and adding devices that individuals would like to try, either because they are unique items that you're just not sure if you want to invest in, or maybe they're more expensive and so you want to absolutely be sure that they work before you buy it. They can also be used as temporary accommodations. So let's say you have someone who broke their hand. That is a temporary disability. That counts. And they may need a temporary accommodation. So that temporary accommodation may be drag and speech recognition or an alternative mouse or keyboard. And so the individual could borrow that, or you could, as the employer, could borrow that for an employee to use just as a temporary accommodation. It can be used to serve as a loaner while a device is being repaired, or even while you're seeking funding. So maybe you have purchased a device, but it's back ordered, because we know that's happened a lot in the last couple of years. That item may be on its way back to the individual, but you need an immediate replacement for that person. It can also, our lending library can also be used for professional development. So if you are in the midst of building assistive technology services in your organization and you would love to learn more about assistive technology, you could actually borrow the devices from our library just to get your hands on it and learn how to use things. And you can access our library inventory at al.atforall.com. And you want to make sure that you go to the APT program. And those are the items that we have available for you to try out for short term. Here is an example of how someone utilized our device lending library. So they used this to try it out before the item was purchased because it was a unique accommodation. So we had an individual that was working at a facility stationed at a reception counter, and this counter was at standing height. So everyone else that worked at this counter with this cash register was standing. Well, the individual who needed the accommodation actually used a wheelchair. And part of his accommodation was one of those electric stools that Daniel Green talked about earlier, so that he could transfer from his wheelchair over to this electric stool and raise up to the counter height. However, the issue was that because everyone else stood against the counter, they always had the cash register pushed to the back part of the counter. Well, this individual, because he was seated, he was a little bit farther away from the register, and he needed that register pulled forward, but it was a little difficult to maneuver. And he would have had to have a bit more strength to be able to pull it forward. So we used this unique little sliding table that's typically used for low vision products. It's called an XY table. And we put that underneath his register. And we tried it out just to see if the concept worked. And it did. It was a fantastic fix for allowing him to be able to easily slide that whole register forward, and then everybody else could slide it back whenever they're standing at the counter. And what we ended up doing is, once we determined that the concept worked, we looked at which features we would prefer, and we ended up recommending that the employer purchase a different type of appliance rolling tray that worked even better than the initial trial. So this not only gave us a try before we buy situation, but it also helped us determine which features we would like to look for. Here's another example of how someone used our lending library. So this person needed a temporary accommodation. They already worked from home, but they had a desktop computer. They developed a pressure sore and were ordered to bed rest. And they were not able to pile that desktop computer up on all their their duvet and work from the bed. So because we had a laptop in our lending library, the assistive technology specialist that was working with that individual was able to acquire that from our library, set it up for the individual, and take it to them so that they could continue working from home but from bed. And once we realized that this was going to be going on for more than 30 days, we did reach out to vocational rehab, and we made the suggestions that a more permanent solution be put in place so this individual would have the option to work at any location in their home. But at least it was able to allow that person to continue working even while they were on bed rest. So part of what we're doing, I just got new furniture for our demonstration here, a demonstration center here in Birmingham. We will be ramping up our demonstrations, I hope, as we add additional staff and locations across the state. But device demonstrations are available through our program, typically here in the Birmingham area. We will try to do our best to serve other parts of the states. But what the purpose of that is for individuals and their colleagues or their caretakers, their family, to be able to sit down with types of devices that they would like to compare and contrast, to figure out if there's a certain brand of device that works better, which features work better within the devices, and then help them make a decision on which device would fit their needs the best. So one of the things that I'm not sure that employers would use as much, but I want you to know that it's available, are our reutilization centers. Our reuse centers recycle durable medical equipment. So wheelchairs, walkers, crutches, toilet risers, all of that DME equipment can be donated to these centers that are across the state. We have 5 centers, and they clean it up and they put it back out, and it's available for free to anyone. So the reason I want you to know about this is, for one, you may have an employee that you overhear talking about how they would like to have a backup wheelchair, or they need a wheelchair, or maybe they acquired a short-term disability and they need a walker or something for the interim. Let them know that there's reuse centers out there across the state. But also, you may have a situation where it would be beneficial to have a backup wheelchair for someone on site at work. Let's say that you have someone who has difficulty walking from the parking lot to their office. Maybe a backup wheelchair stationed near the parking lot could assist that person to get out of their vehicle, get in that wheelchair, and then go to their office. And so there may be some devices that you could have on site that would not supplement or replace the devices that an individual would get prescribed through their medical care team, but it could be something that could be used as a backup. All right, so our goal is to increase knowledge of assistive technology. The more you all know about assistive technology and what's out there, the more success that we are going to be able to pour out and give more individuals with disabilities opportunities that they don't have otherwise. And so we want everyone to know the value of assistive technology. We all use it. Do you remember back in the day when computers weren't a thing? Well, computers do make our lives a little easier. Yeah, Daniel Green saying no, he does not remember days without computers. Oh, man. But there were days without computers, believe it or not. But before we all had one on our laps or in our pockets. So we know that technology makes everyone's life easier. Sometimes it makes it a little more frustrating, but overall, technology is great. We all use it. And there's things that you can implement for everybody in your facility without considering it assistive technology. It's just practical to implement some of these things. And we want to make sure that you as an employer are comfortable recommending assistive technology for employees and that you are comfortable helping an individual implement assistive technology. So our program can customize trainings for your organization if there's a specific topic that you would like to learn more about, whether it's a specific area of assistive technology or how to do evaluations, how to implement technology, or maybe there's a specific device like Dragon that you would like more knowledge on because you have several employees who use that technology. So we can provide remote informational sessions or in-person hands-on sessions. So if you want us to bring some devices and train your staff on the types of technology that's out there, we can do that as well. Another thing that we can do is provide technical assistance to organizations. So part of our Assistive Technology Act grant that we get suggests that we provide technical assistance. And what that means is helping organizations develop their assistive technology services. So if your organization needs some advice and suggestions on how to learn more about assistive technology, how to look at your policies and procedures to determine are there changes that could be made to make assistive technology more easily implemented in your facilities, you could contact us and we can work with you on that. And we can also work on skills development for assessing your assistive technology needs in your facilities, and skills development for implementing, and then guidance on your policies. So there were some links that I would love for you to know, and this is going to be in your handout, so you don't have to write these down, but our lending library is at al.at for all. You can follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn. We do try to keep you up to date on the latest and greatest in assistive technology. We do have some of our webinars posted on YouTube. Look for Accessing Potential Through Assistive Technology. This webinar will be recorded and put on YouTube. You can contact me directly if you have any questions about assistive technology. You can also contact Cassie or Daniel and Daniel. To find our reuse center information, there is a PDF link there. And if you want to just know more, if you're not in Alabama and you want to know more about the Assistive Technology Act program in your state, go to at3center.net and you will find contact information for the program in your state. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Cassie. If you have any questions right now, I believe we can take them.
All right. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Daniel and Daniel, the Daniels. We have just a few minutes for question and answers. If you guys have questions, please put them in the Q&A box and I can read them off really quickly. If you have a question and we don't get to it today, that's okay. Still put it in the Q&A box because we want to follow up with the answer in an email. Also, we will be sending out a resource guide. We know that this was a lot of information. We know that you may have more questions that you don't necessarily want to ask via Zoom. So we are going to send you a resource guide with the presentation, all the information that was shared. So you'll have that along with the recording of this webinar, so you'll be able to refer back to it. We are available for additional training. You'll have the map of the BRCs in your area. You'll have Ashley's information, the Daniel's information. So you can reach out to any one of us so we can do a one-on-one meeting with you or your team, because we definitely want people in Alabama, especially, to be aware of the services and the resources that are available to them at no cost. So I don't see any